The first night the bells rang, Lily thought she was dreaming. But when the clock struck 12:47 a.m., the sound rolled over Ravens Bay Island like thunder from the sea. Blake bolted upright, the sheets cold against his skin. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. It wasn't church bells. They were too heavy, too deep, resonating like iron chains pulled across stone. Then came the voices, dozens of them just outside the cottage walls. A low chant in a language neither of them recognized, vibrating through the glass panes. The temperature plunged and frost bloomed across the inside of the window. Lily reached for Blake's arm, her hand trembling. "They told us never to answer the door if the bells rang," she whispered. And then 3 deliberate knocks shook the wooden frame. A woman's voice followed, calm, commanding, inhuman. "Come out. The island is waiting." Blake pulled the curtain back just enough to see. Every villager stood outside, their faces pale, eyes reflecting lantern light with a sickly glow. At the front was Mayor Blackwood. Her mouth hung open, black veins crawling beneath her skin. The chanting grew louder. The island wasn't welcoming them. It was claiming them. But 3 days earlier, when their ferry first touched the island, Blake and Lily thought they had found paradise. Blake Ashton had never seen his wife Lily smile the way she did when their ferry approached Ravens Bay Island. The September sun cast golden light across the rocky coastline, and the Victorian houses perched on the cliffs looked like something from a storybook. After 2 years of cramped city apartments and student loans, the cottage waiting for them felt like a dream. "Look at that lighthouse," Lily whispered, pointing to the white tower standing sentinel at the island's edge. "It's like we're moving into a painting." Blake squeezed her hand as Captain Frank Delacroix guided the ferry toward the dock. The captain was a weathered man in his 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. He had been unusually quiet during the 30-minute journey from the mainland, offering only grunted responses to Blake's attempts at conversation. "First time on Ravens Bay?" Captain Delacroix asked as he tied the ferry to the dock. "Yes, sir. I'm starting work at the Marine Research Station tomorrow," Blake replied, shouldering their bags. Something flickered across the captain's face. Was it pity? But when Blake looked again, the man was focused on his ropes, muttering under his breath about tide schedules. The couple stepped onto the wooden dock, breathing in the salt air. A small welcoming committee had gathered. A stern-faced woman in her 50s wearing a mayoral pin, an elderly lady with kind eyes but nervous hands, and a young family with 2 children who stayed unusually close to their parents. "Welcome to Ravens Bay Island," the woman with the pin announced. "I'm Mayor Helen Blackwood. We're so pleased you've decided to join our community." The elderly woman stepped forward, wringing her hands. "I'm Dorothy Sinclair. I live just down the road from your cottage. Such a lovely place, though it's been empty for, well, quite some time." "Why is that?" Lily asked, her art teacher's curiosity piqued. It seemed in perfect condition in the photos. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The young father, Robert Whitmore, shifted his weight and glanced at his wife, Grace, who pulled their children closer. "Island life isn't for everyone," Mayor Blackwood said finally. "Some people find it isolating." Mrs. Sinclair nodded vigorously. "Yes, isolated, especially during certain times of the year. But don't worry, dear, we'll make sure you understand the customs." "Customs?" Blake asked. "Nothing complicated," Robert Whitmore spoke up, his voice tight. "Just some local traditions. Quiet hours after 9 p.m., that sort of thing. We'll explain everything once you're settled." As they walked up the winding path to their cottage, Lily noticed how the other residents watched them from the windows and doorways. Not with the warm curiosity she'd expected in a small community, but with something that looked almost like fear. The lighthouse keeper's cottage sat at the end of a narrow lane, its whitewashed walls and blue shutters exactly as charming as the rental photos had promised. The key was under the mat, just as arranged, and inside they found the space fully furnished with antique pieces that somehow managed to feel cozy rather than outdated. "This is perfect," Lily breathed, running her fingers along the kitchen counter. Through the window, she could see the cemetery that sat between their cottage and the village center. An old graveyard with weathered headstones and twisted trees that cast long shadows even in the afternoon sun. That first night, they fell asleep to the sound of waves against rocks and the distant cry of seabirds. Blake had never felt more at peace. The feeling lasted exactly 3 days. Blake's work at the Marine Research Station was everything he'd hoped for. Cutting-edge equipment, fascinating research projects, and a team of scientists who welcomed his expertise in deep-water ecosystem analysis. But each evening, when he returned to the cottage, he found Lily looking more and more unsettled. "It's the people," she told him on Wednesday night as they shared dinner by candlelight. "They're friendly enough during the day, but after sunset, it's like the island becomes a ghost town. And Mrs. Sinclair keeps mentioning these rules." "What kind of rules?" "Stay inside after 9 p.m. Don't go near the cemetery at night. If you hear the church bells ring after midnight, don't answer your door." Lily set down her fork, her appetite gone. "Blake, what kind of place has rules like that?" Blake reached across the table to take her hand. "Honey, lots of small communities have quirky traditions. Remember that town in Vermont where they rang bells for curfew? This is probably similar." But even as he said it, Blake had noticed things too. The way conversation stopped when he entered the village store. How Captain Delacroix always had some excuse for why the ferry couldn't run on schedule. Engine troubles, bad weather predictions, tide complications. When Blake had asked about the weekend service to visit Lily's sister in Boston, the captain had just shaken his head grimly. "Engine's been acting up," Delacroix had said. "Might be weeks before she's running proper again." Thursday night, the bells rang for the first time. Lily jolted awake at 12:47 a.m. to the sound of heavy bronze bells tolling across the island. Not the cheerful daytime chimes from the village church, but something deeper, more resonant. Something that seemed to vibrate in her bones. "Blake," she whispered, shaking her husband's shoulder. "Blake, listen." He sat up groggily, immediately alert when he heard the ominous pealing. Through their bedroom window, they could see lights moving in the village. Not electric lights, but the wavering glow of lanterns and torches. "What the hell?" Blake started to get out of bed, but Lily grabbed his arm. "Mrs. Sinclair said not to answer the door. She said, 'If we hear the bells.'" A knock interrupted her. Slow, deliberate knocks on their front door. They froze, hardly breathing. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice they didn't recognize. "Time to come out, newcomers. Time to join the procession." More voices joined the first, creating a chorus outside their cottage. "Come out. Come out. The bells are calling. Everyone must answer." Blake crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. What he saw made his blood run cold. The entire village stood in their front yard, men, women, children, all holding lanterns and candles. Their faces were slack, expressionless, and their eyes reflected the flame light with an unnatural gleam. Mayor Blackwood stood at the front of the group, no longer the stern but professional woman who had welcomed them. Her mouth hung open, and black veins pulsed beneath her pale skin. "We know you're in there," she called in a voice like grinding stone. "You can't hide forever." The island knows you're here. It's hungry. Lily pressed herself against Blake, trembling. This was wrong, all wrong. This wasn't just some quirky local tradition. This was something evil. The crowd began to chant in a language neither of them recognized, harsh syllables that seemed to make the cottage walls vibrate. The temperature in the bedroom plummeted, and frost began forming on the inside of the windows. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The chanting ceased, the lights disappeared, and the only sound was the normal rush of wind and waves. Blake and Lily didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Friday morning brought no explanation. When they ventured into the village, everyone they encountered was perfectly normal, friendly, helpful, with no memory of the previous night's events. Mrs. Sinclair offered them fresh-baked muffins and asked cheerfully about their sleep. "Did you hear anything unusual last night?" Lily asked carefully. Mrs. Sinclair's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, dear. You heard the bells, didn't you? I was afraid you might. Don't worry. You'll understand soon enough. Everyone does, eventually." Understand what? But Mrs. Sinclair had already turned away, busying herself with her garden as if the conversation had never happened. That afternoon, Blake tried to use the research station's satellite phone to call the mainland, but found the connection mysteriously dead. When he asked his supervisor, Dr. Martinez, about it, the man just shrugged. "Happens sometimes. Island communications can be unreliable. You'll get used to it." But Blake noticed that Dr. Martinez avoided his eyes when he said it. Friday night, they barricaded themselves in the cottage, pushing furniture against the doors and windows. The bells rang again at 12:47 a.m. exactly, and this time the voices outside were more aggressive. "You can't stay inside forever," Mayor Blackwood called. "The island is patient, but not infinitely so. Tomorrow night is the new moon. Tomorrow night, everyone gathers." Saturday brought desperation. Blake confronted Captain Delacroix at the dock, demanding passage to the mainland. "Sorry, son," the captain said, not meeting his eyes. "Engine's still acting up. Probably won't have her running for another week or two." "That's impossible. I saw you take a delivery boat out this morning." Delacroix's face hardened. "That was island business. Different situation entirely." He leaned closer, and Blake caught a whiff of something rotten on his breath. "Take some advice, boy. Stop fighting this. Some things are bigger than what you want. Some things you just have to accept." As the sun set Saturday evening, Blake and Lily made a horrifying discovery. While searching the cottage for anything that might help them understand what was happening, Lily found a journal hidden behind a loose board in the bedroom closet. The journal belonged to the cottage's previous tenants, a couple named Jennifer and Mark Hoffman. The entries started normally enough: excitement about island life, descriptions of beautiful sunsets and friendly neighbors. But as the weeks progressed, the tone changed dramatically. October 15th. The bells rang again last night. Jenny is getting scared. The villagers keep talking about the gathering and the ancient compact. When we ask what they mean, they just smile and tell us we'll understand when we're ready. October 22nd. Tried to leave today. Captain Delacroix claims the ferry is broken, but I saw him taking other people to the mainland yesterday. When I confronted him, he got angry, said some people aren't meant to leave. What the hell does that mean? October 28th. Found old records in the church basement. This island has a history. Every few years, people disappear. Always couples. Always newcomers. The records go back over 200 years. What have we gotten ourselves into? October 30th. They came for us tonight. We couldn't hide anymore. The thing in the cemetery, it's not human. It's older than the island itself. It feeds on. God, I don't know how to write this. It feeds on hope, on love, on the life force of people who still believe in happiness. October 31st. If anyone finds this, don't trust the villagers. They're not evil exactly. They're terrified. The creature made a pact with the first settlers centuries ago. In exchange for sparing the island from storms and bringing good fishing, they have to provide it with offerings, fresh blood, fresh souls. The villagers try to warn newcomers, but they can only do so much before the creature notices. If you're reading this, run. Tonight. Don't wait for the gathering. Don't let them take you to the cemetery. The thing there, it's ancient and hungry and patient. It's been waiting for you specifically. It can smell your happiness from the moment you arrive. The journal ended there. Blake's hands shook as he closed it. We have to leave. Now. Tonight, he whispered. But even as he said it, they could hear movement outside. The villagers were gathering again earlier this time. Through the windows, they could see dozens of lanterns converging on their cottage. There's nowhere to run, Lily said, her voice hollow. We're on an island. The only boat is controlled by Delacroix, and he's part of this. The knocking started, gentle but insistent. Time to go, came Mayor Blackwood's voice. No more hiding. The Ancient One is hungry, and you've kept it waiting long enough. Blake grabbed a kitchen knife, knowing it was useless. We don't answer. We don't open the door. But even as he spoke, the cottage windows began to rattle. Not from wind, but from something else, a presence pressing against the glass from outside. The temperature plummeted again, and this time the frost spread across every surface in the room. Then the windows exploded inward. It wasn't the villagers who entered first. It was something else. Shadows poured through the broken windows like liquid smoke, bringing with them the stench of rotting seaweed and ancient death. The shadows had weight and substance, grabbing at Blake and Lily with tendrils that felt like ice-cold rope. Blake slashed at them with the knife, but the blade passed through harmlessly. The shadows wrapped around Lily's ankles and began dragging her toward the window. Blake! She screamed, clawing at the floor. He lunged for her, grabbing her hands, just as the villagers poured through the front door. But these weren't the friendly neighbors they'd met upon arrival. Mayor Blackwood's face was a mask of black veins and yellow eyes. Mrs. Sinclair's mouth had opened too wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth. The Whitmore children moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, their necks bent at impossible angles. Don't fight it, Robert Whitmore said in a voice like grinding gravel. Fighting only makes it worse. The Ancient One prefers its offerings alive, but it will take you dead if necessary. The possessed villagers grabbed Blake and Lily, their touch burning like dry ice. No matter how hard they struggled, they couldn't break free. The villagers dragged them from the cottage and through the village, past darkened houses where curtains twitched with watching eyes. Ravens Bay Cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the harbor. As they approached, Lily realized the shadows weren't from headstones. They moved independently, writhing like living things. At the center, where the oldest graves clustered around a crumbling mausoleum, the earth had split open. From the crack emerged something that defied description. Part shadow, part flesh, with too many angles and appendages existing in more dimensions than human eyes could process. The Ancient One. It spoke without words, reverberating in their minds. So long since fresh hope walked this island. You will sustain me well, little ones. Your joy will feed me through the winter months. The villagers formed a circle, their faces blank with resigned terror. Blake understood. They weren't evil collaborators. They were prisoners, enslaved while their own life force was slowly drained year by year. Please, Blake gasped. What do you want? What I have always wanted. What I was promised by the first settlers. Fresh souls full of hope and love and dreams. You shine so brightly with happiness. You will burn in my belly for months." The creature reached toward them with crystallized darkness. Where it touched, flesh withered and hope died. But just as those terrible fingers were about to make contact, a voice cut through the night. "That's quite enough." Everyone, villagers, creature, and captives alike, turned toward the sound. A figure stood at the cemetery's entrance, barely visible in the darkness. He was tall, wearing what looked like weathered outdoor gear, and there was something about his presence that made the shadows recoil. The Ancient One hissed, its form writhing with sudden agitation. "Who dares interrupt the feeding? Who dares enter my domain uninvited?" The figure stepped closer, and Lily caught a glimpse of his face in the moonlight, weathered but kind, with eyes that seemed far older than his apparent age. "Someone who's seen enough of your kind," he said calmly. "Someone who knows how to send you back where you belong." "Impossible. No mortal can stand against me. I have ruled this island for 300 years. 300 years of stolen life. 300 years of enslaved souls. That's quite enough time, don't you think?" The Ancient One roared, a sound like a hurricane crashing against cliffs. Its appendages lashed out at the stranger, but somehow never quite reached him. Every attack seemed to pass through empty air, as if he existed slightly apart from the world around him. "Listen carefully," the stranger said, his voice carrying clearly across the cemetery, despite the creature's rage. "This thing feeds on despair and helplessness. It draws power from your fear and resignation. But there's something it fears more than anything else." "What?" Blake gasped. "Hope? Real hope. The kind that chooses to fight even when fighting seems impossible." The stranger gestured toward the old church that bordered the cemetery. 200 years ago, when the first pastor realized what the villagers had made a pact with, he tried to stop it. He blessed a cross and buried it in the church garden, hoping to create a sanctuary. The creature killed him before he could complete the ritual. But the cross is still there, still waiting. "Lies," the Ancient One snarled, but there was uncertainty in its mental voice now. The holy symbol was destroyed long ago. "Then you won't mind if they try to find it?" the stranger replied. He looked directly at Lily, and she felt a strange warmth flow through her. "You've faced darkness before, haven't you? When you were younger?" Lily's eyes widened. Somehow, impossibly, he knew about the haunting that had terrorized her family when she was 8 years old. The shadow that had crept through their house night after night until her grandmother had performed an old ritual that drove it away. "How do you—" "The same way I know you have a choice to make right now. Run, and spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved these people. Or fight and risk everything for the chance to break a 300-year curse." The villagers holding them had loosened their grip, distracted by the stranger's presence. Blake felt hope flicker to life in his chest. Not the naive optimism they'd felt upon arriving at the island, but something harder and more determined. "The cross," he said. "If we can find it." "It won't be easy," the stranger warned. "The creature will try to stop you with everything it has. And once you commit to this path, there's no turning back." Lily thought of all the couples who had come to this island before them, full of dreams and love, only to disappear into the Ancient One's hungry darkness. She thought of the Hoffmans, whose journal they'd found. She thought of the villagers, trapped in their supernatural slavery for generations. "We have to try," she said. The Ancient One sensed their resolution and shrieked with rage. The very air around them began to thicken with malevolent energy, and the shadows on the ground reached up like grasping hands. "Run," the stranger said. I'll hold it off as long as I can. Blake and Lily broke free from their captors and sprinted toward the church. Behind them, the creature's fury shook the very foundations of the island. The earth cracked beneath their feet, and phantom winds tried to knock them down. The possessed villagers gave chase, moving with inhuman speed and coordination. The old church sat dark and silent, its doors long since rotted away. Blake and Lily plunged into the shadowy interior, searching desperately for any door or window that might lead to a garden. There, Lily pointed to a narrow passage behind the altar. They squeezed through and found themselves in what had once been the pastor's garden. Overgrown and wild now, but still recognizable as a place where someone had once tried to grow beauty and hope. Where would he have buried it? Blake asked, frantically scanning the ground. Lily closed her eyes, trying to remember her grandmother's teachings about consecrated ground. Somewhere central. Somewhere that would anchor the blessing to the entire space. In the center of the garden stood an ancient oak tree, its massive trunk scarred by centuries of storms. At its base, barely visible beneath layers of fallen leaves and encroaching vines, they could see the outline of disturbed earth. They dropped to their knees and began digging with their bare hands. The soil was cold and hard, but they clawed at it desperately as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Behind them, the church walls began to crack and crumble under the Ancient One's assault. There, Blake's fingers touched something solid. Together, they pulled away the last of the dirt and revealed a wooden cross, simple but perfectly preserved despite its centuries underground. The moment their hands touched it, warmth flooded through them. Not just physical warmth, but something deeper. A sense of peace and protection that pushed back against the creature's malevolent influence. The Ancient One burst through the church wall, its form even more terrible in the confined space. It had grown larger, fed by its own rage, and its presence made the very air toxic to breathe. "You think that trinket can stop me?" it raged. "I am older than your pathetic faith. I am stronger than your desperate hope." But even as it spoke, Lily noticed that it couldn't come closer than 10 feet to where they knelt with the cross. The blessed ground was holding it back. "Now what?" Blake asked. "We found it, but—" "The ritual," Lily said suddenly. "Grandmother always said consecration requires intention and sacrifice. The pastor started it, but he never finished." She gripped the cross tighter, feeling the weight of what they had to do. "We have to complete what he started. We have to willingly sacrifice something precious to create a sanctuary." Blake understood immediately. Our life here, our dream of starting fresh. It seemed like such a small thing compared to the magnitude of what they faced, but Lily knew it was exactly right. The creature fed on hope and dreams. To destroy it, they had to willingly give up their most cherished hopes. Together, they held the cross and spoke the words that came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "We offer our dreams of this place. We sacrifice our hopes for a perfect new beginning. Let this ground be cleansed. Let this darkness be banished. Let those who have been enslaved go free." The cross began to glow with soft white light, and the Ancient One screamed as if it had been stabbed. The light spread outward from where they knelt, racing across the ground in all directions. "No! The compact cannot be broken! I will not be banished!" But the light was already consuming it, unraveling the dark threads that had bound it to the island for 3 centuries. As it dissolved, the possessed villagers collapsed, freed from their supernatural slavery. The shadows that had writhed across the cemetery became still. The oppressive weight that had hung over the island lifted like fog before sunrise. When the light finally faded, Blake and Lily found themselves alone in the garden. The cross in their hands had become ordinary wood once more. But somehow they knew its work was done. They stumbled back through the ruined church and into the cemetery, where they found the villagers slowly picking themselves up from the ground. Mayor Blackwood's face was human again, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Sinclair sat among the tombstones, sobbing with relief. The Whitmore children clung to their parents, whole and normal and free. "Is it over?" Robert Whitmore asked, his voice hoarse. "It's over," a familiar voice confirmed. They turned to see the stranger approaching from the darkness. In the aftermath of the supernatural battle, he looked somehow less solid than before, as if he were already beginning to fade. "Who are you?" Lily asked. "How did you know about the cross? How did you know about my grandmother?" He smiled, and there was infinite kindness in his expression. "Someone who goes where he's needed. Someone who helps when the darkness grows too strong." "But the cross," Blake pressed. "How did you know it was there?" "Because I've seen this pattern before, in dozens of places, across centuries of time. Evil takes root, grows strong, enslaves the innocent. But there's always someone who plants a seed of hope, even if they don't live to see it bloom." He began walking toward the cemetery entrance, already becoming translucent in the moonlight. "Wait," Lily called after him. "Will we see you again?" "When you're needed," he said, and then he was gone. Blake and Lily spent the rest of the night helping the villagers recover from their ordeal. As dawn broke over Ravens Bay Island, Captain Delacroix appeared at the cemetery, looking dazed but determined. "I owe you folks an apology," he said gruffly, "and an explanation. That thing, it's been controlling us for so long we'd forgotten what it felt like to make our own choices." "How long have you been trapped here?" Blake asked. "Me personally? 15 years. Came here for a fishing job and never left. But some families have been prisoner for generations. We tried to warn newcomers as best we could, without triggering the creature's wrath, but..." He trailed off, looking ashamed. "You did what you could," Lily said gently. "You weren't responsible for what it made you do." Later that morning, as Blake and Lily packed their belongings, Captain Delacroix knocked on their cottage door. "Ferry's running fine now," he announced. "Engine's been purring like a kitten since sunrise. Funny thing, though." "What's that?" "Had a passenger yesterday I can't quite remember. Said he was here to study maritime archaeology. But here's the strange part. I've been the only ferry operator for 15 years, and I keep perfect logs." He scratched his head, looking genuinely puzzled. "Checked my records, checked the harbor master's log, even asked around the village. No one saw any stranger arrive. No ticket sold, no passenger manifest entry. It's like he was never here at all." Blake's marine training made him press further. "Captain, you said you saw him yesterday?" "Clear as day. Middle-aged fellow, calm as anything. Paid cash, said he'd been on other islands too." "But son..." Delacroix leaned closer, his voice dropping. "I've worked these waters my whole life. There's only one way on or off this island, and that's my ferry. The currents, the rocks, nothing else could make it. So if I didn't bring him here..." He trailed off, staring out at the impossible coastline. Blake and Lily exchanged a meaningful look. That afternoon, they stood on the ferry deck as Ravens Bay Island grew smaller behind them. They had given up their dream of a perfect new life in that idyllic cottage, but somehow the sacrifice felt like a victory rather than a loss. "Do you regret it?" Blake asked, taking his wife's hand. Lily thought about the villagers they'd left behind, free now to rebuild their lives, to make real choices, to hope for genuine futures. She thought about the generations of couples who had disappeared on that island, their dreams consumed by ancient hunger. She thought about the stranger who had appeared when they needed him most, offering them the chance to fight rather than simply survive. "No," she said firmly. "Some things are more important than our own happiness." As the ferry carried them toward the mainland and whatever came next, neither of them noticed the way the other passengers on the boat seemed to recognize them. The way a young mother smiled and nodded as if thanking them for something. The way an elderly man tipped his hat in a gesture of respect. They didn't notice because they were already looking ahead, planning their next chapter. They had learned something important on Ravens Bay Island, that real hope wasn't about finding the perfect life, but about choosing to fight for what was right, even when the cost was higher than you wanted to pay. Behind them, the island sat peaceful in the afternoon sun, its lighthouse beacon no longer a trap, but a genuine guide for travelers. The cemetery on the hill was just a cemetery now, full of old graves and memories rather than supernatural terror. And somewhere in the church garden, a simple wooden cross lay buried once more, waiting patiently in case it was ever needed again. But that's a story for another day.